Think of evolutionary biology as the ultimate history book. But to read the chapters about the plants and animals we see today, we first have to go back to the very beginning of the library. Before we can understand how life changed over millions of years, we have to look at the why, how, and the where the life started. That means looking at the birth of stars, the cooling of the earth, and the origin of the universe itself. This is the longest story ever told, partly discovered, partly pieced together by science. It is the epic tale of how biodiversity began on a tiny blue planet set against the massive background of evolution of universe itself. Now let us talk about our origins. Imagine you are standing outside on a clear dark night looking up at the stars. You are not just looking at light, you are looking at history. Because light takes millions of years to travel trillions of kilometers, the sparkle you see tonight might have left its star before humans even existed. While we see things on Earth instantly, looking at the sky is like peeping into a cosmic past. It reminds us that we are part of something unimaginably vast. In this massive universe, nearly 13.8 billion years old, our Earth is just a tiny speck. It all started with a singular, huge explosion, the Big Bang. It was so massive, it's hard to even describe. As the universe expanded, it cooled down. Eventually, hydrogen and helium gases formed, clumped together due to gravity, and birthed the galaxies we see today. Fast forward to about 4.5 billion years ago, our home, that is Earth, was born in the Milky Way galaxy. But back then, it was not the blue and green paradise we see now. The surface was a molten fairy mass. There was no atmosphere. Instead, the molten earth released a blanket of water vapor, methane, carbon dioxide, and ammonia. Sunlight broke water molecules into hydrogen and oxygen. The light hydrogen escaped into space, while oxygen reacted with other gases to create the ozone layer. As the planet cooled, water vapor turned into rain, not just a shower, but a massive downpour that lasted ages, filling the earth's cracks to create the oceans. About 4 billion years ago, that is, 500 million years after Earth formed, life appeared. But how? Scientists have argued over this for centuries. Some early thinkers believed spores or units of life traveled through space and landed on Earth. It's the life from the stars theory. It is called panspermia. For a long time, people thought life just popped up from rotting straw or mud. This theory is about spontaneous generation. But Louis Pasteur proved this wrong. He showed that life only comes from pre existing life. If you seal a flask and kill everything inside, nothing new grows unless you let life in from the outside. If life comes from life, where did the first cell come from? Scientists Oparin and Alden proposed that life began through chemical evolution. They argued that the early Earth was a giant laboratory with high temperatures and volcanic storms. In this reducing atmosphere, inorganic chemicals started bumping into each other to form organic molecules like RNA and proteins. In 1953, S.L. Miller recreated early Earth in a lab. He filled a flask with methane, ammonia, and water vapor, then shocked it with electricity. This electricity simulates the natural lightning. The result is he found amino acids, which are the building blocks of life. In similar experiments, others observed formation of sugars, nitrogen bases, pigment, and fat. Analysis of meteoroid content also revealed similar compounds, indicating that similar processes are occurring elsewhere in space. This proved that soup of the early ocean could indeed create the molecules needed for life. We don't know exactly how it happened, but around 3 billion years ago, the first metabolic capsules appeared. These were not quite cells yet, but they were giant molecules like RNA and proteins that could perhaps replicate themselves. Finally, about 2 billion years ago, the first actual cells appeared. They were single celled organisms living entirely in the water. From those tiny, humble beginnings in the prehistoric ocean, the entire variety of life on Earth today, from whales to redwood trees to you, evolved. We started as a speck in a 13 billion year old universe. Through fire, rain, and a complex chemical soup, the Earth transformed from a molten rock into a living planet. We are quite literally the result of billions of years of cosmic chemistry. Now let us see about evolution of life forms. Before modern science took the lead, the prevailing belief was the theory of special creation. This theory rested on three main ideas. All living things were created exactly as they appear today. They have not changed. The variety of life has always been the same and will never change. And the earth is only about 4,000 years old. These are the three main ideas on which the theory of special creation was rested on. In the 19th century, Charles Darwin challenged these ideas after his famous voyage on HMS Beagle. By observing wildlife around the world, he realized living organisms share similarities with each other. They also share links with ancient extinct life forms. Extinction and the birth of new species are natural parts of Earth's history. Darwin proposed that evolution happens gradually through a process called natural selection. Here is how it works. Within any population, individuals have different characteristics. It is called variation. In nature, resources like food space are limited. Individuals with traits that help them survive better in their environment are fitter. In Darwinian terms, fitness is not just about strength, it is about reproduction. Those who survive longer live more offsprings or progeny. Over generations, these advantageous traits become more common, eventually leading to new types of organisms. Darwin was not alone. Another naturalist named Alfred Wallace reached the same conclusions while working in the Malay archipelago. Together, their work led to two major realizations. All living things are related and share common ancestors from different geological periods, that is, eras or epochs. The history of the earth and the history of life are linked. Science confirms the earth is not just thousands of years old, it is billions of years old. To summarize, we moved from believing life was static and earth was young to understanding that life is a dynamic, evolving web. Through natural selection, nature picks the best adapted individuals to pass on their traits. This tells us that every living thing today is connected by a massive family tree that stretches back billions of years. What are the evidences for evolution? The strongest physical evidence comes from fossils, which are the reserved remains of hard body parts found in sedimentary rock layers. Think of the Earth's crust like a giant history book. Older rocks are at the bottom and newer ones are on the top. When we study fossils in these different layers, we see that life forms changed over time. Some organisms, like dinosaurs, exist only in specific layers, showing they rose and became extinct at specific times. Scientists use radioactive dating, calculating the decay of isotopes, to determine the exact age of these fossils and the rocks they are found in. This type of evidence is called paleontological evidence. Next is morphological and anatomical evidence. By comparing the structures of different living things, we can see how they are related. There are organs or bones that look similar in structure but perform different functions. Example is the four limbs of a human, a cheetah, a whale, and a bat. Even though they are used for grasping, running, swimming, or flying, they all share the same bone pattern, that is, humerus, radius, ulna, carpals. Here, the same basic structure evolves in different directions to adapt to different needs. This is called divergent evolution. These structures are called homologous structures. Next, there are structures that look similar and perform the same function but come from completely different ancestors. Example is the wings of a butterfly and a bird, or the flippers of a penguin and a dolphin. This occurs when different species face the same environmental challenges and converge on the same solution, like wings for flying or streamlined bodies for swimming. This is called convergent evolution. These structures are called analogous structures. Next, we will see about embryological evidence. Early in life, vertebrate embryos show striking similarities. For example, all vertebrate embryos, including humans, develop gill slits behind the head. In fish, these become gills. In humans, they disappear before birth. While Ernst Haeckel popularized this thought, Carl Ernst von Baer later clarified that embryos do not replay the adult stages of other animals. They simply share common early developmental paths. Next is biochemical evidence. Just as bones can be similar, the blueprints of the life are similar too. Diverse organisms share similar proteins and genes. This molecular consistency across different species is a powerful indicator that we all share a common ancestor. Now let us see about evidence from selection. First is anthropogenic selection, which occur due to human influence. We do not have to wait millions of years to see evolution. We have done it ourselves. Humans have bred dogs, crops, and livestock for centuries. If man can create a new breed of dog in a few hundred years, it stands to reason that nature can create new species over millions of years. Another example is our use of antibiotics and pesticides has led to the evolution by chance of resistant bacteria and insects in just a few months or years. Next is natural selection. A famous real world observation occurred in England. Before industrialization, tree trunks were light colored due to lichens. White moths were camouflaged or hidden, while dark moths were easily spotted and eaten by birds. After industrialization, soot darkened the trees. Suddenly, the dark moths were hidden and the white moths were easily spotted and eaten. The result is the population shifted to favor the dark moths. This proves that natural selection is not a planned process, it is a stochastic, that is, a chance process, where those who fit the environment best survive. Evolution is not a straight line toward a goal, it is a process based on chance mutation and environmental changes that determine who survives to pass on their genes. Next, let us see what is adaptive radiation. At its simplest, adaptive radiation is an evolutionary process where one single ancestor species branches out into many different forms. Think of it like a tree trunk splitting into many branches, or a single point radiating outward in different directions. This happens when a species finds itself in a new environment with many different types of food and habitats. To survive without competing for the exact same resources, the animals evolve specific traits to fit those jobs. There are two examples to explain this. First is Darwin's finches. When Charles Darwin visited the Galapagos Islands, he noticed something strange about the small black birds there. All the finches originally came from a single seed eating ancestor because the islands had different food sources like insects, fruit, or hard seeds. The birds' beaks changed over generations. The result is from one original bird, multiple new species emerged, each with a beak perfectly shaped for its specific diet. Second example is Australian marsupials. Australia is a massive isolated island where a similar thing happened. From one ancestral marsupial, a huge variety of animals evolved. This gave us everything from kangaroos and koalas to Tasmanian wolves and sugar gliders. All of this happened within the same geographical area in Australia. Now let us see about convergent evolution. Sometimes two different groups of animals like placental mammals, which are found worldwide, and marsupials, which are found in Australia. They evolve to look almost identical because they live in similar environments. For example, the placental wolf and the Tasmanian wolf look very similar because they both evolved to be top predators, even though they come from completely different family trees. When this happens, where two different lineages end up looking alike because they adapted to the same lifestyle, we call it convergent evolution. Now let us see about biological evolution. When did evolution actually start? True biological evolution began the moment cellular life appeared. Specifically, it started when these cells developed different metabolic capabilities, meaning some cells were better at processing energy or food than others. These differences are the raw material nature works with. The heart of Darwin's theory is natural selection. To understand how it works, we look at two factors. One is the speed of life. Evolution is tied to a lifespan. Microbes like bacteria reproduce in minutes, so we can see them evolve into new forms in just a few days. For larger animals like birds or humans, this same process takes millions of years because our life cycles are much longer. Other is survival of the fittest. If you have a colony of bacteria and change their environment, like adding an antibiotic, most of the bacteria might die. But if a few have a variant trait that lets them survive, they will multiply. We say those bacteria have better fitness. Fitness is not about being the strongest, it is about having inherited genetic traits that allow an organism to survive and reproduce in its specific environment. Darwin's theory rests on two main ideas. One is branching descent. This is the idea that different species share common ancestors and branched out over time. Second idea is natural selection. This is the mechanism that decides which of those branches survive based on the environment. Before Darwin, a scientist named Lamarck had a different idea. He thought evolution happened through the use and disuse of organs. Lamarck's view was that the giraffes stretched their necks to reach high leaves, and because they stretched, their bodies were born with longer necks. Now, this is considered incorrect. You cannot pass on acquired traits like muscles from the gym to your children. Evolution only works on genetic traits you are born with. Is evolution a process or a result? This is a philosophical chicken and egg question in biology. When we look at the history of the world, we see evolution as a process, that is, a series of events. When we look at the variety of life today, we see evolution as the result or consequence of natural selection. One more thing to note is Darwin was influenced by Thomas Malthus, who studied populations. Malthus observed that resources like food and space are limited, and populations naturally want to grow exponentially. The result is there is a struggle for existence. Because no two individuals are exactly alike, those with variations that allow them to use resources better will survive. These survivors leave more offspring, passing on those successful traits. Over many generations, the entire population changes and new species emerge. Now we will see mechanism of evolution. To understand evolution, we first have to look at a historical missed connection. Charles Darwin gave us the theory of natural selection, but he could not quite explain how new traits appeared. Interestingly, while Gregor Mendel was discovering factors, what we now call genes, Darwin either did not know about them or did not include them in his work. This left a gap in our understanding of where variation actually comes from. In the early 1900s, a botanist named Hugo de Vries changed the conversation while studying the evening primrose plant. He proposed that evolution is not always a slow crawl. Instead, he introduced the idea of mutations. The differences between Darwin's view and De Vries' view are fundamental. Darwin's variation is small and minor, and it is directional. That is, it tends towards improvement, and it is gradual. It slowly occurs over many generations. De Vries' mutation is large and sudden, and it is random and directionless. And it is a saltation, that is a single step large jump. What does saltation means? It is derived from the Latin word for leap. De Vries believed a single massive mutation could create a new species instantly rather than waiting millions of years for tiny changes to add up. According to De Vries, speciation, that is, the birth of a new species, is caused by these sudden mutations, while Darwin thought species branched off slowly like a growing tree. De Vries argued that a mutation pressure could cause a sudden leap that separates one group of organisms from their ancestors. Who was right then? Well, later studies in population genetics provided the clarity we needed. We now know it's a bit of both. Mutations are the raw source of new traits, as De Vries said. But natural selection usually acts on those traits gradually over time, as Darwin said. Now let us study Hardy-Weinberg law. The Hardy-Weinberg principle, at its core, this principle acts as a mathematical baseline that helps scientists determine whether a population is evolving or staying the same. The principle states that in an ideal world, allele frequencies, that is, the percentage of different versions of a gene, stay constant from one generation to the next. The total collection of all genes and alleles in a population is called gene pool. When the gene pool does not change over time, the population is in equilibrium, meaning it is not evolving. It is called genetic equilibrium. To track these frequencies, we use a simple algebraic equation based on a diploid organism, which has two sets of chromosomes. Let small p represent the frequency of the dominant allele, capital A. Let small q represent the frequency of the recessive allele, small a. Since there are only two options in this model, the sum of their frequencies must always equal 1. So, p plus q is equal to 1. To find the frequency of individuals, that is genotypes, in the population, we use the binomial expansion, that is p square plus 2pq plus q square is equal to 1. What do these terms mean? P square indicates frequency of homozygous dominant individuals, that is both alleles are capital A. 2pq represents frequency of heterozygous individuals, that is capital A and small a. Q square represents frequency of homozygous recessive individuals, that is both small a. If we measure a population and the numbers don't match this equation, we know that evolution is happening. The farther the numbers are from the expected values, the faster the evolutionary change. In the real world, equilibrium is rarely perfect. There are five main forces that push a population out of balance and drive evolution. First is gene migration, also called gene flow. When individuals move in or out of a population, they take their genes with them, changing the frequencies in both the old and new groups. Second is genetic drift. This is change due to pure chance. A small group might break off and start a new population. This is known as the founder effect, where the new group's gene pool looks very different from the original. Third is mutation. Random changes in DNA can introduce brand new alleles into the population. Fourth is genetic recombination. This happens during the making of sperm and egg cells, that is during meiosis, where genes are shuffled into new combinations. Fifth is natural selection. Nature picks the traits that help an organism survive and reproduce. Natural selection does not always work the same way. It can change a population's traits in three distinct patterns. One is by stabilization. Here, nature favors the average individual. Extremes are eliminated. Example, medium-sized babies survive better than very small or very large ones. Second is directional change. Nature favors one extreme. The population shifts in one specific direction. Example, giraffes evolving longer necks. Third is disruption. Nature favors both extremes and dislikes the average. This can eventually split a population into two different species. Now let us see a brief account of evolution. The story begins in the deep past. About 2000 million years ago, the first cellular life appeared. We are not exactly sure how chemical molecules turned into living cells with membranes, but it happened. Some of these early cells began producing oxygen, likely through a process similar to modern photosynthesis, using sunlight to split water. Over time, these single celled organisms evolved into multicellular life. By 500 million years ago, invertebrates, that is, animals without backbones, were active in the oceans. Life started in the water, but it did not stay there. Plants were the pioneers. They invaded the land first and were widespread by the time animals followed. Around 350 million years ago, fish with strong stout fins called lobe fins began to crawl onto land and return to water. We thought these were extinct until a coelacanth was caught in 1938. These lobe fins were the ancestors of the first amphibians. Amphibians are creatures that live in both worlds, like the ancestors of modern frogs and salamanders. Amphibians eventually evolved into reptiles. This was a huge turning point because reptiles laid thick shelled eggs that did not dry out in the sun, allowing them to live entirely on land. For about 200 million years, reptiles ruled the earth. Some, like the ichthyosaurs, actually went back into the ocean. On land, dinosaurs were kings. The most famous Tyrannosaurus rex stood 20 feet tall with teeth like daggers. About 65 million years ago, the dinosaurs vanished. Scientists debate why. It might have been a sudden climate change, or perhaps they evolved into birds we see today. After the reptiles declined, mammals stepped up. The first mammals were tiny, shrew like creatures. They had a major advantage, that is, they are viviparous. They gave birth to living young and protected their offspring inside their bodies. Mammals were generally more intelligent, better at sensing danger and adapting to new environments. Let us see the impact of geography. As continents drifted apart, South America's unique mammals like giant bears and hippo like creatures were eventually replaced by North American species when the continents joined. Australia's pouched mammals, like marsupials, survived specifically because they were isolated and did not have to compete with other types of mammals. Today, mammals are found everywhere. Some return to the sea, like whales and dolphins, while others evolved into the diverse land animals we know, like horses and elephants. The most recent success story in this long chain is the evolution of humans, defined by our unique ability for self consciousness and complex language. Now let us study about origin and evolution of man. Our story begins roughly 15 million years ago with two key primates, Dryopithecus and Ramapithecus. They were hairy and moved much like modern gorillas or chimpanzees. While Dryopithecus was more like a modern ape, Ramapithecus showed more human like characteristics. 3 to 4 million years ago, man like primates were walking in eastern Africa, specifically Ethiopia and Tanzania. They were generally not taller than 4 feet, but they had achieved a major milestone, that is, walking upright. About 2 million years ago, Australopithecines lived in African grasslands. They were scavengers and hunters who used stone weapons but primarily ate fruit. As brain sizes grew, we see the emergence of the genus Homo. Homo habilis, known as the first human like being or hominid. Their brain capacity was small, that is around 650 to 800 cc, and they likely did not eat meat. Homo erectus, who were likely the first of our ancestors to incorporate meat into their regular diet, providing the energy needed for larger brains. Following them, we see the Neanderthals. Living between 1 lakh and 40,000 years ago in the Near East and Central Asia, these were sophisticated humans. They had a brain size of about 1400 cc, roughly the same as ours today. They were also culturally advanced. They wore animal hides for warmth and were among the first to honor their dead with burials. While Neanderthals were in Asia and Europe, Homo sapiens, that is, modern humans, arose in Africa. During the last ice age, specifically between 75,000 to 10,000 years ago, modern Homo sapiens began to spread across the globe. As they moved into the different environments, they adapted and developed into the distinct races we recognize today. After that, humans were not just surviving, they were creating. Around 18,000 years ago, we see a massive explosion in prehistoric cave art. The Bhimbetka rock shelters is a prime example of this in India, specifically the Raisan district of Madhya Pradesh. These paintings gives us a direct window into the minds of prehistoric people, showing their connection to nature and wildlife. The biggest turning point in our history happened about 10,000 years ago, the invention of agriculture. Once humans learned to farm, they no longer had to move constantly to find food. They started settlements. Permanent settlements led to the rise of villages, then cities, and eventually the great empires. Everything that follows, the rise and fall of great civilization, is what we now call recorded history.